when you move a subject into a new background by using a gradient tool. So we're going to start by going up to the File Open command and come to today's lesson and to the new background with gradient folder. And we're going to open the Eric portrait, and we're going to order Replacement Sky New. So those two are the ones we're going to open, and you might as well open them together. There's the replacement sky, and I once again did what I forget to do. If you open the photo bin before you open the images, they will fit correctly. If yours looks like mine and it's covering up the photo bin, you do a View Fit On Screen, which is Command or Control 0, and that will make them, it'll let you see your, this is in Elements important because that photo bin is also where each of the tool options will appear. This is a friend of mine in Colorado who helped me for years in the Colorado workshops, Eric. And that was a real messy background. So I figured, well, that's a good example of how we might want to put him in a better one. Since it's primarily a portrait, the background shouldn't be very significant. I'm not focusing on it. Well, I'm not spending time having you select with the quick selection. So this is a PSD file because I saved the selection. So if you will go up to the Select menu and come down to Load Selection, you'll find that I already selected Eric, and the selection is called Eric. And so if you just click OK, you'll get the selection around Eric. And it wasn't that difficult. I just used the quick selection tool when I did it. And so in the handout that I gave you, I talked about refining the edge. And so I used the Refine Edge tool, which is found in Select. So if you go up to Select, you'll find the Refine Edge, or it's called, Mask and Select and Mask or whatever in Photoshop. They have another name for it, but it's the same thing. So it opens up, and we are not concerned with hair, so I'm not really worried about catching all the fine hair like we did last week, but we do have a rather rough edge on that. And so you have many ways of viewing this, but white really shows you the edge here. And we're going to be putting it on a rather light background of a sky. So white is it's the default, and it works pretty well for showing the edge. So I have said the two things that I did with this had to do with adding a little smoothing and a little feathering. How much you add depends upon the file size. And this file is like 1.3 megabytes. It's not a very big file. So when you move the smooth and the adjust edge, notice how it changes the edge of the image as you go along. And all I want to do is get rid of the rugged edge. I ended up using in the tutorial at a 20. And then I commented that if you have a huge file that you're doing this on, and you're more likely to be doing something of significant size, your smooth edge may have to be bigger than that. But what I do is look, did it smooth out the edge that I had from my selection? And it did. And the feathering is very small. On this one, I ended up feathering, I think, well, I don't know, maybe it's too much. I think I said 2. Let's try 2. 2 may be even too much feathering. It softens the edge a little bit. Oops, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. I hit the Enter key. So I'm going to go back to my Select. If you didn't hit the Enter key, you didn't get lost on it. I went ahead and applied it already, sorry, and I didn't want to. So what do you do when you make a mistake? Good opportunity. You go back to your History panel. And I want to undo the Refine Edge thing, so I back up one step to where it said Load Selection, and now I have an unrefined edge, so I can do it right. Now I can go back to Refine Edge. I can add 20 to smoothing and about 2 to feathering, and don't push any return keys like I did, because we want to look at the bottom section output. we didn't have this fussy hair where you get some of the background hanging around. That decontaminate colors is wonderful when you've got hair and it kind of picked up the background color. In this case, we don't have any edge like that, so I'm not going to decontaminate. But the output is really important to do the job we want to do. We don't want to output to selection. We want to output to new layer with layer mask. This is the most flexible way to take it out. And so I'm going to choose that option, and then I'm going to say OK. And now I have my image on a new layer, and it comes with a layer mask, and the layer mask hides the part that I don't want to take with me. So I now have him on a transparent background, and that's what the mask did. Now the other thing that mask will do is, you may remember from last week, we end up sometimes with an edge that isn't very nice and sharp against the background. It has a halo. Once we move this into a new background, if we have a halo around him that says, oh, everybody will know we moved him, then all we have to do is apply that technique to this mask. So we're glad to have it. It gives us versatility. So what I'm going to do is bring up this other one next to it. And this guy, and I might comment here that I have a folder of skies. You know, if you get a day when you have an interesting sky, if you point your camera up and get a piece of sky, I have to go above the trees because I don't want the trees in it. I have some interesting skies I can use. But the trouble is, they are from high up in the sky. They're not down at the horizon. And so we're going to correct that problem, and that's how the gradient tool will help us make that sky more realistic eventually. So at this point, all I want to do is move Eric into the new background. So let me remember, activate the Eric file. All I have to do is drag his shoulder, which is like here, over until it's over the blue background and let go. But I want him to be centered in the new file. So I need to add the shift key. Whenever you're moving something and you want it to end up not just anywhere you drop it, but centered, you take your shift key and you hold it down, and then you grab the move tool, and I can pick the shoulder up, long as it's Eric, and hold my mouse button down and drag Eric into here, and I can let go of my right hand, but I don't let go of the shift till it's done. The shift is controlling its centering. If I lift the shift too soon, it won't be centered. So it's the last key I lift. And now if we look at it, we'll see we have some kind of bad edges around his hat. Can you see that? And we had that same trouble when we moved things last week. And the answer to it was that we went over here to this lovely mask, and we used a special brush to clean up the edge of the selection. Remind you that if you follow tutorials from Matt Klaskowski, Matt does all his refining of the edge after he moves it into a new background. And so that's another option. I choose to do it the way we did it and then clean up the mask after. And the way we clean it up is we come over here to the brush tool, we pick it up, we want to work on the black edge and add to the black background. So we want black as the color in the foreground. Remember, if you have purple and green, if you simply have a D for default, you'll get black and white. Or you'll notice we have a little black and white choice at the bottom. And then if you've got them in the wrong order and you need to move black to the top of the heap, X for exchange will do it, or the bent arrow will move them back and forth. So you know how to manipulate the foreground and background, because we need black to be in the foreground. Then I have the brush tool. I want the brush to be soft, and it has fuzzy edges, it's soft. If I told you last week, I'll repeat, if you think an edge isn't soft enough, you don't have to go play with this drop-down window, which is a nuisance. You're going to make it softer from the keyboard. And if you remember, when we have a brush and we want to size it, we go to the bracket keys next to the letter P. All we do to soften or harden it is add the shift key. So if I go and hold the shift key down and I find the bracket keys next to P and I push the right bracket key, it gets harder. Can you see down here the brush looks harder? If I have the shift key and I use the left bracket key, it gets softer. It's very handy to know that you can make a brush softer or harder from the keyboard while you watch it change. The trouble with the pull-down menu is you don't know what you're clicking on. It's kind of trial and error, where here it's easy. So I know I have a soft brush. And for this project, we want the opacity to be 100. And I've just done it, so my mode happens to say overlay. Most of the times we use a brush, it's set to normal. And so when you go to do this special trick, you must check the mode, and if it's normal, you must change it to overlay. And then I need to remind you that if you go to use a normal brush the next day, you may have to put it back. One of the things that Adobe software does, it remembers the last way you used a tool, and it comes back just as you used it. In this case, that doesn't necessarily help you. So review: a brush, black, 100% soft, and in overlay mode. And now I'm ready on the mask. So I have to come over here and say, what is active in that layer? I've got to click on the mask to make it, that's where I'm painting. I don't want to paint on the image. So once the mask is active, I come up here, and if I paint along the edge of that hat, look how I can improve the selection around him. And so I trace all the edges that are against the sky and go over them with this overlay brush, which cleans up any leftover mess from the selection. And it's kind of a miraculous thing to see happen. And again, it's if I had left all of the refine edge till after it was in a mask, I could have seen the refine edge and how it works. The reason I have to do this is when we refine the edge, we didn't see what the blue background was going to do to it. Now that we do, we fix it. And I love this because it really fixes it. Nobody would know that we had moved him. Now that we've improved the edge where the sky and Eric come together, we're going to do the part which makes the sky become more natural. Remember that if I had had a sky at the horizon behind him, the bottom would be lighter than the top. That's just the way the earth affects the sky as we look. And so what I'm going to do is show you how we can get a gradient effect on the background and make it more realistic. To start out, I need you to select the background layer. And then with the layer selected, we're going to open a new hue and saturation adjustment layer. So if you'll come to the bicolor circle, which is at the top of the layers panel in Elements, but at the bottom in Photoshop CC, click it open and choose Hue Saturation. This will place a hue saturation layer right above the background. So when I use it, it's going to affect the background. It's just above it. And so to do this, we need to explore the gradient we're going to apply. So if you'll come over to your toolbox, there's a gradient tool that looks like a gradient. If you can't find it, you will just simply choose the letter G and it'll get you to the tool. And when I click on the gradient tool, I have some options that are available to me. There are at the option bars, either bottom in Elements or top in full Photoshop. And you'll see that the default gradient is from black to white. And that's the one we're going to use. So we don't have to change that gradient choice. We want it to be darker at the top, and we're going to be applying the gradient from top to bottom. And then if you'll look over here, you'll see that we have the opacity at 100%. Do not let the word reverse be checked. If it is, it will give you white to black. We want it black to white, so it should be an empty square. Transparencies and dither are just left the way they are. And then at the right, you'll see 5 types of gradients. And the first one is the one we want, and it's the linear gradient. We want to apply it in a straight line. So as long as you have that set, you have the basic settings, and now we have to go and choose the word edit that's under the gradient box. So when you click edit, you see the full controls. We already have black to white, which is the top left preset. If for some reason you had a different program, that is fine. You just get that default. And then down below, I've made a change. I've taken this point of where the gradient starts, and I have taken it over to the left, which is where yours will probably be when you start out. Well, if I leave it there, I'll have the full range of the gradient from very dark to very light. But sometimes in a sky, you don't need that much contrast over a short distance. So I'm moving that tool in until I get to 20%. And how do I know when I'm there? Because over here, well, I lost it. Let me go back. When it's at 20%, I'll find in the location box the 20% indicator. So I've cut out that 20% of the darkest part of the gradient. And again, this is just a preference, and you'll learn to do what you prefer. So once that's done, I'm going to say OK. And now, as long as I am over on this hue and saturation adjustment layers mask, I'm ready to give the mask a gradient. So, assuming you still have your gradient tool and you've set it to what you want, come to the top, hold the shift key so you have a straight line all the way to the bottom. And when you get there, you can lift your hands and you'll see a gradient appear on the hue and saturation adjustment layer mask. And that's going to be the way that we chose to set the gradient tool. So that has done that, but you're probably thinking nothing's happened. Well, that's because the magic occurs in the controls for the hue and saturation layer, and we haven't done them yet. So if you will now go and click on the front part of that adjustment layer until you bring up this lovely hue and saturation adjustment. We have several controls here, and they're all going to be applied to the mask of this image. The hue says, do you like the hue of the sky? Would you want to change it? If you move that, you can either make it a cooler looking sky, or you can make it a warmer sky, or if you want to go back where you were, go over to the right box and type a 0. That's the way it started. So you can change it if it doesn't suit you. I'm going to leave it as it was. And then down at the saturation, if you think that the sky needs to be darker, you can saturate the blues in that. So we can just give a little more density if we wish to. That's perfectly up to you and your choice. But the magic occurs in the lightness slider. As you move the lightness slider to the right, the bottom of your horizon will lighten, and that will apply the difference between the top and bottom. So that as you go, the more you move it to the right, the lighter the horizon is compared to the top. And again, if you want to see what you did, go to that hue and saturation layer and turn it off and turn it back on again. And you will have lightened the horizon. So it just is a much more natural looking sky. So it means that sometimes when you capture replacement skies, you're pointing your camera up to avoid the trees and houses. And consequently, you may have lost that natural gradient, and you can add it afterwards. So we've added that to what we want, and that leaves us so that we could save this. And of course, I will save it normally as a Photoshop document. And when I do that, I have the option to make corrections another day. Sometimes I decide to change it. I can go back into the hue and saturation and change my settings if I don't like them the next day. So do save your work as a Photoshop document so that you keep all your layers. Then when you're ready to use it, you will simply merge the layers. If you need to resize it or do anything else to your image, it's just the way you would normally work on any image. And then you can save it in the format that is appropriate.